Hello everyone and welcome back yet again to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you guys yet again for tuning in. Happy Wednesday all. We made it to the middle of the week and we should have a kind of intriguing show ahead for you guys. Every single segment we're looking at position groups, specifically in terms of strength of schedule. Now, you might be wondering, why is strength of schedule so important when we are talking about fantasy, especially fantasy football? Well, it's very integral to know who early on has the easier slate so that they can build momentum throughout the year when they get to the tough games. And it's also interesting to know which players might have gotten the short end of the stick. And position group by position group, we will go through and see which position might struggle in some areas and which might have some strengths. Before we get into any of that, I do want to remind you to like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network as a whole. It is greatly appreciated by all involved. And if you do feel so inclined, please consider leaving a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud. That is also a huge support to both me and my fellow podcasters, and ultimately the network as a whole. You can also consider leaving tips or questions, comments, or concerns. They will be addressed and answered at the beginning of the next episode. Anything concerning the show is greatly appreciated. I would love to get your opinions on certain things. But without further ado, let us jump right into today's show. Let's start off in the world of running backs. The running back market, of course, is going to get a lot more congested as the years progress, as running backs get better and better. And so strength of schedule is going to be an interesting point to look at and discuss and debate for many years. We're talking about running backs. Which running backs are you most comfortable with taking early in fantasy football drafts to really kind of take advantage of their easier slates? So let's talk about the winners of the running backs for the 2024-25 NFL season. Let's start off with the running back who I really think can get back to his 2021 form. And he really is in a division that is going to be a slugfest, so he's going to take advantage of a lot of really tight games. And I think his touch rate is going to be very high in the early goings, and that is Jonathan Taylor. I think that Jonathan Taylor is by far going to have one of the easier slates, which is kind of funny considering that no game in the AFC South can be taken for granted. I mean, that division is perhaps going to be the most scrutinized in terms of the race for number one. The Texans are going to be there. Jacksonville, I think, is going to refine itself a little bit. And Indianapolis, with Anthony Richardson coming back from that injury, is going to look early and often to find some ways to get some early wins, and Jonathan Taylor will be a huge part of that. In the early goings, they have games against the Texans, a huge divisional game to start off, and the Packers, Bears, and the Steelers. They play the NFC North. And that's a division where you can steal a couple wins, maybe not as many as you think, because the Packers are always solid. Who knows what the Bears are going to be? And the Lions might just be the best team in the NFC, the most well-rounded team. And so, in the early goings, Jonathan Taylor really might get a huge share of the workload depending on how Anthony Richardson progresses, because this is his first full season under center for the Indianapolis Colts, and how he adjusts to different defenses will largely depend on if Jonathan Taylor's doing well. So from the word jump, Jonathan Taylor is someone who I think a lot of fantasy football managers should and can rely on in the early going, because they're going to be facing some very tough games in the early goings. But that being said, it's an easy schedule for Jonathan Taylor himself. It's not an easy schedule for the entire team. It's nothing like that. When you really meet it out for all position groups and break it down to the running back position, Jonathan Taylor has an easy slate, and the easiest out of any of these running backs. And then we're going to go to a running back situation that's more by committee. In the Los Angeles Chargers, and especially Gus Edwards, I think that he will be someone heavily scrutinized. He's the fourth easiest schedule, and I really think the Chargers are going to become predicated on running the football. That will really work out for Gus Edwards. They start off the Panthers, the Steelers, the Cardinals, and Saints, weeks 5 through 6. Those are big games where you expect Gus Edwards to get a lot of touches. And what I like most about running back by committee approaches is that the first guy is always going to be the most versatile. You know what I mean? We saw it when he was with the Ravens. Gus Edwards was perhaps the most versatile. He got the chunk yardage. He really helped in the receiving game. And I really think he's going to translate well to the Chargers' philosophies. Jim Harbaugh is really going to appreciate a running back like Gus Edwards and utilize him a lot more than people expect. Now, the problem with that might be that he's not going to get as many touches as, say, a Jonathan Taylor, but I still think all of his touches are going to be valuable touches. There are touches there that are not going to be taken for granted. I think that Gus Edwards will make the most of them, and ultimately I think that it will pay off in terms of him being a solid fantasy running back, at least for the first couple of weeks of the season. Then we move to one of my favorite running backs. He's on my favorite team in K9, Kenneth Walker. I think that a lot of people underestimate Kenneth Walker as a fantasy running back, but there's some interesting stats to know about a guy of Kenneth Walker's caliber. He has a top 5 projected schedule. He plays the NFC and AFC East mostly, so you can see that there could be some wins. You can pick some up against, say, the Giants and Commanders. You'll be in struggles with the Eagles and Cowboys, and so on and so forth. But in the AFC East, I think they can steal a couple games. It's going to be tough, but Kenneth Walker's going to get a lot of touches in those games. I really think he's going to be a pivotal part of this offense because I feel like a lot of attention is going to be focused on Geno and his receiving core, and not a lot of attention is going to be brought to a guy like Kenneth Walker, but he's still an asset for the Seattle Seahawks. And I think he's going to be utilized in many different ways. He perhaps has some of the most explosive traits of any Seattle Seahawks running back since that man Marshawn Lynch. And so they really need to use that to the best of their abilities. So I think he's going to get fewer touches. I still believe that, like Gus Edwards, because he's also a true RB1, they're going to be much more valuable. And the RB2 behind him is definitely more of a situational kind of running back. Zach Charbonnet is more of a power back. And Kenneth Walker is kind of the more versatile, kind of makes the extra cut back. And so, in this schedule, I think he will be very successful. And one thing to note is that in 10 games last year, he had 15 touches and 16 PPR points in those games. And so, while there certainly are more experienced running backs and guys who might have more appealing schedules in your eyes, to the naked eye, Kenneth Walker is one of these running backs you can't necessarily overlook. He might go a little bit later than you would like, but he's still going to be there. Maybe you see him as a streaming option. Maybe you see him as a flex option. But I still think he if drafted, is going to be an asset for any team. Now, last but not least, let's see a guy who's in a new home for this upcoming season. A guy who also, much like Jonathan Taylor, needs to regain his footing in the league, wants to find himself on a new team, and that is Josh Jacobs. Moves from Las Vegas to Green Bay, and now I believe that he's going to be a running back who a lot of people are going to hinge on really solidifying this team. I think that being perhaps the most experienced player on this offense also helps in that regard. And I believe that Josh Jacobs still has a little bit of extra juice to him. I think that in the Las Vegas Raiders offense, he kind of ran stagnant because the Las Vegas Raiders offense was stagnant to some degree. And so, on a young, hungry, scrappy team, I think that Josh Jacobs' traits will be shown even more. I think that Jordan Love needs a backfield partner that he can rely upon, who has been in this league and who's looking himself to grow beyond what he was in Las Vegas. And I think that's going to have a positive impact on how people view him. They play in the early goings, the Eagles, Colts, and Rams. And then from week 5 on, they play the AFC South. Should be a couple easy wins, but this is a highly competitive schedule for the Packers because of the fact that they were a second-place team last year. They got a second-place schedule. And so, it's the 6th easiest schedule, but if he navigates the tough start, I really think Josh Jacobs can get going. I think that all of the Packers' hopes hinge upon them being able to beat the teams in and around them. And I think that Josh Jacobs, playing in a tough division in the ASC, really knows a thing or two about playing and diagnosing the weaknesses in tough teams. But now, overall, looking at these 4 running backs, these are not high-end guys. Maybe Jonathan Taylor was a couple of years ago, but these are not guys who are world beaters. They're not McCaffreys. They're not Halls. They're not even Mosterts or Achans, who I've kind of talked a little bit about in a negative light. But these are guys who can get the job done in certain situational moments, are on teams that, more than anything, should preach the run game a little bit more. Don't necessarily know about Kenneth Walker, though, because who knows with the Seattle offense, because they have new coaching implemented. But all 4 guys who should be in run-friendly schemes and now have the schedules to back up their style of play. And so overall, you can choose these guys if you want, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to wait and see with these guys. They're not really set in stone as guys I would immediately grab. They are nice streaming and flex options, we can say. That will just about do it for this segment. Coming next, we look at the losers of the running back schedule. Which of the guys on this list got the short end of the stick? We'll be back to discuss them on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Hope you guys enjoyed that first segment. Before we get into who had the short end of the stick concerning the running back position, I do want to remind you yet again that if you do feel so inclined, please consider leaving a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud. It is a huge support to both me and my fellow podcasters and ultimately the network as a whole. You can also leave any questions, comments, or concerns about the show, and they will be addressed at the beginning of the next episode. Without further ado, let's jump from the highest of highs in terms of strength of schedule to the lowest of lows at the running back position. Now, these aren't guys who I don't necessarily think will not be good. This is just based off of when I look at their schedules, when I look at their situations, I don't necessarily see a path where these guys are truly guys who are going to be immediately guys who pop out in terms of that strength of schedule. And so without further ado, let's jump right into it. Starting off with a guy moving from Buffalo, where he was in a bit more of a comfortable running back situation to now the New York Giants, where he could find himself getting a lot of touches because the less we say about the Giants' offense, the better. But it is steadily improving. We're going to talk a little bit about Devin Singletary. As the new Giants running back, he has the worst schedule. And I think the ultimate path for Devin Singletary to overcome that is he's going to have to win within division. That's going to be very hard because each and every single team in that division now seems a little bit more loaded than the Giants. Even the Washington Commanders, who have faith in Jaden Daniels and have really kind of acquired so many different players on the offensive side of the ball who can contribute immediately. Then, of course, it's the Eagles and the Cowboys, and everyone's looking up at them in that division. And so it's going to be tough, but Devin Singletary is going to have to find a way early. There is a stretch of games where from weeks 15 to 17 he could find himself getting some touches. He plays the Ravens, the Falcons, or the Colts later in the season. And ultimately, in the AFC North, you're not going to find many wins. So, when I look at Devin Singletary, I look at a guy who perhaps can receive a lot of touches early on, depending on how Daniel Jones' rapport with his prospective wide receiver 1, Malik Nabers, goes. But at the end of the day, when you're playing an AFC division as tough as the AFC North, I'm really scared for your chances at a running back. And when you play in a division that's starting to become a two-horse race like the NFC East, it's going to be tough to win interdivisionally. And so Devin Singletary is in a really weird situation where he can be in a situation where he's required to receive a lot of touches, but his schedule does not necessarily positively impact what he's going to do with those touches. And so I think that at the end of the day, you have to shy away from a guy like Devin Singletary and focus on someone else, because right now the Giants' running back situation and their schedule to boot does not look very comfortable. And then we go to another guy who not only has to play AFC North, he's required to because he is in the AFC North. That is Najee Harris. Third toughest schedule. And the thing I think about with Najee Harris is that he definitely is in a good situation. There's balance in that Pittsburgh Steelers running back room between himself and Jaylen Warren. But even though he's a starter, he plays more like a power back. Jaylen Warren's the more explosive of the two, I would say. And you're not really getting much help out of your receiving core. We talked about the Steelers' receiving core in depth and how thin they really are. They're going to be relying on Pickens and Pat Freiermuth a lot. And so I think that while it could positively impact the number of touches Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren receive, I don't necessarily think that it's going to matter because you're always going to be playing from behind when you're in the AFC North. It's tough now because the AFC North is a division that predicates itself on being up on the weakest team in it, and that right now is probably Steelers. You can say that their defense can keep them in games, but it's not going to matter if the offense can't get clicking. Najee Harris should be relied upon a lot more often, but I feel like by going out and getting two guys in Russell Wilson and Justin Fields who kind of contrast each other, where one's a more of a deep passer and one's more of a runner, then that kind of takes away the value of Najee Harris. If Russell Wilson starts, he might be wanting to throw the ball more downfield, get a lot more things going that way. And if you're Justin Fields, then a lot more RPOs can be implemented, and that takes away some of the touches. And you have to kind of consider Justin Fields as another rusher because of the value he adds there. And so when I look at Najee Harris, I see a solid back who can pick up good yardage. But the question is, will he be relied upon often, and in what form? Because both of these quarterbacks aren't necessarily going to help him improve his game. Russell Wilson certainly is not someone I think of helping running backs. In Denver, Javonte Williams became a star by necessity because Sean Payton really struggled to get Russell Wilson going in those early stages of his career as a Denver Bronco. And so, I don't think I can say the same about Najee Harris, especially in a very tough division. And now let's switch to a guy who's back in Dallas. A guy who had a good start to his career in Dallas, but now is not necessarily coveted as often. And so, Ezekiel Elliott is going to have one of the tougher schedules for any running back in this league. Now, there's a lot to like about Zeke. I don't necessarily think that he got off on the right foot with the Patriots, and that's kind of why a lot more teams don't necessarily want him. But coming back to the Cowboys, I feel like he's in a good environment. But when you consider the fact that Mike McCarthy really is not a run-first head coach, you consider the fact that the Cowboys also play the AFC North. They play Cleveland week 1. That's going to be a tougher test than people think. The Ravens week 3. You definitely are going to have to focus a lot more on getting ahead of those teams. And it feels like the Dallas Cowboys have become a little more reliant on Dak in recent years. I think that Dak has gotten a lot more touches in the offense, but then again, the receiving core is not necessarily as deep as you would expect out of an NFC and quote-unquote Super Bowl contender. So that should work out for Zeke. I just don't see a path where Mike McCarthy's fully comfortable with integrating Zeke into the system. I kind of like Zeke as a kind of a gadget back. That's what I kind of group him and lump him into. He's kind of that gadget back who can get going in many different ways. He can be utilized in many different ways. And so, while he has a tough schedule, I think that Dallas really needs to rely upon him. Because at the end of the day, who knows what the Dallas Cowboys' identity is truly going to be. It can be predicated on getting Dak a comfortable position passing, but it can also be predicated on getting Zeke going, because there needs to be more variation. That's the thing I think about with the Dallas Cowboys. If you're so reliant on Dak, then how are you kind of mitigating for the yards you can get from a running back? And so I think they feel as if Zeke can be a valuable asset. They just have to prove it. At the end of the day, when I kind of sum up all of these running backs, we kind of got the short end of the stick. None of these guys are truly stars, quote unquote. But they're not necessarily in situations where they're not going to get touches. When I think about the Giants, yes, you got Malik Nabers to get Daniel Jones going, to give him a solid wide receiver 1. But it doesn't gloss over immediately the fact that your wide receiver room is still kind of in a weird position. You have one guy who you're relying on who's a rookie, nonetheless, and just a bunch of role-playing guys that Daniel Jones probably won't trust. And to top it all off, Daniel Jones is coming back from injury. So why not give it to Devin Singletary? You know your schedule is tough, so why not? So I'm not saying these guys, in terms of touches, aren't going to succeed. So who knows what these guys can be. I don't think they're necessarily quote-unquote losers based off situations. I just think that people think that their strength of schedule is going to be much tougher than expected. And when I look at Najee Harris, he's in a situation where he's in a fantastic running back room. Both of these guys set each other up so well. Both him and Warren complement each other so well. But both of the quarterbacks they brought in aren't necessarily going to help their case. You have a deep ball passer and a quarterback who's more comfortable rushing than passing. So, by fate of circumstance, Najee Harris is now not as coveted as he would be. And then Zeke Elliott, he's very up in the air because a lot of teams didn't want him. The Cowboys scooped him up. He's back with McCarthy, who's more of a pass-first kind of guy. And so I just feel that you don't necessarily have to look at it as strength of schedule. You have to look at it as if these guys are going to be used properly. Because if they are, then they have a chance to overcome their short end of the stick schedules. And if they do that, then who knows? Maybe roles will reverse where some of these winners kind of fall into the losers category. Because the winners kind of are on teams that are a little more settled than the Giants, Steelers, and the Cowboys. They're technically more settled than the Giants and Steelers, but still, they kind of fall apart at the end. But you know what I mean. That will just about do it for this segment of today's show. Kind of as we go to the QB position and look at some winners in that situation. And they might be guys you have not suspected would be as good. We'll be right back after the break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. We've transitioned now from the position of the running back to the position of QBs. Now, everyone tells you to wait on QBs, right? They're always going to be there in the 6th or 7th round. You pick your position players first, and then you pick your QBs. The question remains, however, which QBs should you pick if you're kind of in desperation mode? If all the good QBs are gone, and you're kind of left with a mix of Tier 2, Tier 3 guys, which of those guys do you select for your fantasy football team? And hopefully this segment helps, because a lot of these guys I don't necessarily see in either of these tiers. Some of these guys I think of as Tier 4 guys, mainly due to fate of circumstance, but still, you get the picture. However, these are the quarterbacks who are winning in terms of their strength of schedule and in terms of how they can view their schedule as a whole. Because these guys can quickly become stars. Some are already stars. And so, without further ado, let's jump right into the winners in terms of strength of schedule for the QB position. Now, the first guy on this list might surprise you. Coming back from an injury, certainly does not have the skill position talent that other quarterbacks on this list will have, and maybe even that some of the losers at the QB position, which we'll get into later, have. But he has a new number 1 receiver in Marvin Harrison Jr. He has Trey McBride at the tight end position, and most of these guys are fantastic role players. So I really think this guy definitely has something going for him, and that is Kyler Murray. Wait, there we go. That's the picture of Kyler Murray that we want. Now, a lot has to happen. A, he has to come back fully fit and ready for any test thrown his way. And B, he has to develop quickly a rapport with Marvin Harrison Jr. and the rest of his receiving core. He has to figure out which of the guys he wants to rely upon outside of Marvin Harrison Jr. because a lot of attention is going to fall on Marvin Harrison Jr. by opposing defenses. But still, the top 12 schedule, favorable early and late, against the Patriots, Panthers, and Rams from weeks 15 to 17. And in the NFC West, who knows? It's a very competitive division. You can pick up a couple divisional wins. And so, much like Kenneth Walker in Seattle playing the AFC East, you can pick up a couple of wins there. And I think that the Cardinals are a team that's going to be predicated on shootouts, and then that Kyler Murray definitely has the talent to keep his team in a lot of games. He did it in the past, with much better receiving cores, mind you, but still, if Marvin Harrison Jr. is as good as people truly think he is, then I think he's going to be one of the better receivers that Kyler Murray has worked with. And so, Kyler Murray is going to take advantage of the early state of games to get his team comfortable, and then the latter half of the season, who knows? This is a team that could be potentially surprising, fighting for a playoff berth. That's how versatile I think the NFC West is going to be. That's how volatile I think the entirety of the NFC is going to be. I think there's a place for the Cardinals in the reckoning here. And if Kyler Murray can come back fully fit and really rejuvenate this skill position group, this is a dangerous Arizona Cardinals team, and I wouldn't want to be facing this offense in the early to latter stages of the season. Then, another guy in the NFC West who definitely is becoming more comfortable as a fantasy QB. I'm going to talk about him a little later in the week in terms of fantasy football, and that is Brock Purdy. Top 5 schedule, top 10 for fantasy playoffs, because as we all know, the fantasy playoffs come from weeks 15 to 17 in the league. He plays the AFC East, like we said, with all of these NFC West teams that we've talked about. And I really think Brock Purdy has a lot of chances to shine. Last year, he kind of struggled in prime time, especially that game against the Ravens, but that was without all the weapons at his disposal. As we all know, he, without a doubt, has the best weapons at his disposal of any QB, and that is why I think a lot of people should cover him more. I myself am still skeptical of Brock Purdy because I still think of him as a system QB. I still think of him as fitting perfectly into what the 49ers want to run because of the weapons they have. You don't necessarily have to be a solid quarterback to really get the ball to all the weapons, but nevertheless, Brock Purdy has proven himself as someone that the 49ers can rely upon and that fantasy football managers can rely upon. 2 games in Brock Purdy's schedule where a lot of people will have his eyes on him. The Week 7 matchup against the Chiefs and the Week 8 matchup against the Cowboys. Those are the 2 prime time games that Brock Purdy will have to really prove himself and cement himself as a guy who can trust. Outside of that, I think Brock Purdy is easy sledding. That being said, maybe the trade rumors that have been surrounding that skill position group, especially with Brandon Ayuk, could kind of add some tension to this skill position group. But still, Brock Purdy is a guy who I believe can keep this group on schedule and really help them achieve their goals. And no matter what you think of Brock Purdy, he's always a guy you should consider for as long as those weapons stay in San Fran. Because if no one's leaving, then this team is set. And so I can't necessarily say much more about how solid of a position Brock Purdy is and for any QB in the league. And coming up next, our first rookie that we're talking about, who finds himself in a much better situation than many rookie quarterbacks coming into the league find themselves in Caleb Williams. Now, Caleb, obviously the number 1 overall pick, perhaps one of the better prospects out of college since, say, Trevor Lawrence. So he has that going for them. And to top it all off, he actually has a solid 3-headed monster at the wide receiver positions. He has DJ Moore, who's been in Chicago for quite some time. He's have Keenan Allen now, a veteran wide receiver in this league coming over from the Chargers, and now a fellow rookie in Roman Dunze he can rely upon. So he's not short of talent in his offense. That deep core is really going to lead him to early success. The top 10 ranking in terms of schedule. Weeks 4 through 8 is where he gets the cupcakes in his schedule. Against the Panthers, the Jags, the Commanders, the Cards, and the Patriots. And so he really has an opportunity to really grow into the season as a rookie. Maybe he starts off a bit rockier in the early stages of the season, but in the middle part of the season, when he has an opportunity to play some teams that aren't going to be as good, he's going to be someone who is going to certainly have his chances to shine. Now, with that being said, a lot of the times projects like this can falter early on. And in the NFC North is less margin for error. So I'm really looking out for him in divisional games for Caleb Williams to really find growth. Because the Lions are a well-rounded team. The Packers are going to be challenging them as well. So at the end of the day, Caleb Williams really has to rely upon his receivers to get going. If he builds that trust, then I think the schedule is going to be a breeze for him. If he wins those chunk games in the middle of his season, Panthers, Jags, Commanders, Cardinals, Patriots, then I think that the Bears team is going to shock some people. I think this Bears team can sneak into the playoffs, to be honest with you. But it all comes down to how Caleb Williams grows and improves in his rookie season. And then, for a shocker of a last guy on this list, a guy who I actually like certain traits in his game, but his overall game and the team that he's on isn't necessarily something that's really hopeful. It isn't necessarily something that I see working out. And that, of course, is Derek Carr. And the reason why I like Derek Carr is that he has one of the more underrated deep balls in the league. But that is not an all-around solid QB make. And on a Saints team that's always going to be in competitive games, especially in the NFC South, as all four teams believe they have a shot, well, maybe not the Panthers, outside of this division, I don't necessarily see Carr being someone who I will rely upon. That being said, though, it's an easy schedule. He gets the Panthers twice this year because of the fact they're in the same division. And who knows what the other NFC South teams look like. The Falcons, on paper, look the best team in the NFC South and look like they've separated themselves a little bit. But that's just on paper. Kirk Cousins is coming off an Achilles injury. So he might not be the same quarterback he was in Minnesota. And then you look at the Bucs, they lose Dave Canales, who was really the architect of the big season from Baker Mayfield. So as we go through this list, it kind of opens up for the Saints. But I'm not saying Carr's the best part of the Saints. He's certainly not going to be the reason that if they are to make a run at the NFC South and win the division, or say, I don't think he's going to be the reason why. Out of all these guys, I feel like he's the one who could be kind of slated. I think in a super flex league, he works out a little bit more, where you can pick and choose your matchups. If, say, your QB1 is not in a good matchup, you feel like then maybe Carr's a guy who, if he's playing a NFC South team, can step in. So he's definitely someone who is going to cause a lot of controversy in terms of whether you pick him or not. But when I look at this slate, these are definitely some QBs who are interesting, and you guys might not have expected. You might not have expected both Kyler and Caleb on this list. Kyler, because A, he's coming off an ACL injury, and he might not be fully fit, and B, because, well, he's stepping into a wide receiver room where there's a lot of uncertainty outside of Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride. And you look at Caleb, well, he's a rookie quarterback. Some rookie quarterbacks are successful, some are not. So it's definitely a toss-up. He has a very good setup for him on offense, so we'll definitely have to see how he evolves that side of it. And then the biggest surprise of all is Derek Carr. But then you see the places where these teams are in good situations, where the Arizona Cardinals don't necessarily have to play the toughest of AFC divisions, where the NFC South is looking a little bit more open than people think. And that's where you can kind of see why these QBs can potentially find their footing. And so, while some of these guys may be unappealing to some, I think there might be a chance that you'll be looking at them when it's all said and done. But that should just about do it for this segment. Coming next, we look at the winners at the wide receiver position. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting guys here. We'll be back with that segment after the break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Hope you guys have enjoyed the show thus far. We now transition from QBs for a little bit to the wide receiver position, one of the most pivotal positions in fantasy sports, because there's an obvious tier 1 and then there are some guys who at best are flyer options. So trying to make sense of the wide receiver market is going to be very difficult for some. But hopefully this segment helps you in that department, because most of these guys really have fascinating opportunities to grab hold of being good wide receivers in the system. And so, without further ado, let's jump into why these wide receivers can be highly coveted based off of their strength of schedule. Now, the wide receiver position, the reason why it's so tough is because as more and more wide receiver rooms get more and more crowded with talent, it's tough to find the balance that you want. And as someone who preaches balance in a fantasy football team, as someone who doesn't necessarily want a high-end guy who's going to get all your points, as someone who wants to find a guy who can mitigate for if your wide receiver one has a terrible day, it's always going to be about how you view A, wide receiver rooms, and B, the strength of the team itself. And so, kind of delineating which of these wide receivers can win in their strength of schedule could really help you decide which of these guys it can be taking should you want a more balanced team. We're starting off with a guy who's definitely the most experienced in his wide receiver room. We talked about his quarterback just a couple of minutes ago, and this guy will essentially be perhaps his top receiver due to his experience, but maybe because of other guys might not get as many opportunities as people think. And that is DJ Moore. He had the third best schedule for wide receivers, but that's the same case for both Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze. If DJ Moore, really separates himself, then I'll be fine with him getting the lion's share of the targets, and saying that confidently. But right now, this wide receiver room really doesn't have a true number one yet. I kind of feel like it will come down to what Caleb Williams sees and what he feels comfortable with. Is it the guy who has most experience in this Bears system? Is it the guy who's a veteran in this league, has been one of the better wide receivers in the league for many years? Or is it the rookie who he's coming in with and has worked out with in the recent past who gets the most targets? And I think that the reason why DJ Moore is seen as the most advantageous out of all of them in the fantasy is because, well, he's the guy who's probably going to set the bar. I feel like while he's not necessarily going to be the wide receiver one, he's going to get the most touches in early downs to really get this offense going, because Caleb Williams, I feel like, will feel most confident going with someone who knows the early down plays the most. And as the game goes on, he gets more improvisational, and that's where Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze come in. So, the comfortability that lies in DJ Moore, combined with that strength of schedule, really makes him someone who can be intriguing. That being said, if you're catching passes on early downs, you might not be, in open space that often. Or in the red zone that often, for that matter. And so that's the only concern with Moore. Is his touchdown production going to go down? And if so, how will that affect his fantasy stats? But right now, I feel as if DJ Moore is going to be relied upon a lot to get Caleb Williams comfortable. And maybe that should just be enough for him to be coveted. Then we look at a wide receiver room that's definitely going to be very much by committee. Maybe not going to see as many touches as others on this list in Ladd McConkey and Joshua Palmer. They are top 10 in terms of schedule in weeks 1 through 4. They have the Raiders, Panthers, Steelers, and Chiefs in 15 through 17. They have the Bucs, Broncos, and Patriots. So as you can see, they have some nice little games early on in the season when you really want to solidify yourself in your fantasy football league, and later in the season when the playoffs come around. But the reason why I say they're not like Moore is because, well, who knows what Jim Harbaugh's philosophy and offense is going to be. Who knows if Ladd McConkey and Joshua Palmer are going to get touches and where on the field they're going to get them. I feel as if Jim Harbaugh's going to stick with a run game, stick with a solid offensive line, and really make Justin Herbert more of a timing-based quarterback. That doesn't necessarily really hurt the wide receivers as much as it might hurt Justin Herbert. But at the end of the day, this is not a wide receiver room I feel comfortable kind of vouching for in fantasy football. Their schedule can be as easy as can come, but it doesn't make sense in terms of what I feel like Jim Harbaugh is going with this offense. And so I feel like this room could have potential to grow if Jim Harbaugh relies upon them and they turn out to really help Justin Herbert feel more comfortable. But at the end of the day, Jim Harbaugh seems like he's headed in a different direction than pass-first philosophies. And then, of course, let's end with a wide receiver who has always had solid traits. We never had the consistent QB play to really have a breakout moment, and that is Drake London. We talked about the NFC South a lot on this show. We talked a lot about, how Drake London, if he gets a consistent quarterback, can really pop. He's had 1,000-yard seasons without, a solid QB. And for that matter, when I look about the NFC South, there's also an opportunity for Chris Olave because Derek Carr was on the biggest winners list for QBs. The NFC South, it's an AFC West and NFC East schedule. So the best teams you're playing are the Chiefs, Eagles, and Cowboys. There's only 3 teams that you're really worried about. The rest are winnable games. And so, I think about Drake London and think about how it's fit in this offense. If Kirk Cousins is just serviceable, Drake London can really pop. And then Chris Olave, on the other hand, is a guy who has always popped in this league, has not necessarily had, above average play because both Winston and Carr at his quarterback position have been below average in my humble opinion. And so, while I like the setup for them, it's all going to come down to how their quarterbacks play. I feel more confident in saying Chris Olave is a guy who I would immediately take because he's the center of the offense for the Saints and he's what really makes them tick, than Drake London, because I feel like should the Falcons really believe in Kirk Cousins to operate this offense to full effect, it's going to be a lot of touches to go around. You're going to have to incorporate Bijan. You're going to have to incorporate Algier even. You're going to have to incorporate Kyle Pitts. And so Drake London may not get as many touches as we think. He has a lot of hope and optimism surrounding him for what he's done without a competent QB. But right now, I would say out of all the NFC South receivers, let's kind of take away Mike Evans and Chris Godwin because we know how good they are. And Mike Evans will always be in the conversation to have 1,000-yard seasons up the wazoo, first ballot Hall of Famer. So let's focus on these two. Out of both of them, Chris Olave perhaps is the guy you should take. because of the fact he's going to get a lot of touches, and he is the bell cow for that wide receiver room for the Saints. When I look at this entire list, when I look at the receivers on, I see a lot of opportunity, and I see a lot of wishful thinking. The opportunity that I see is with DJ Moore, because he really has a chance in terms of experience, in terms of being comfortable in a setup, to really pop. And ultimately, he's in a wide receiver room that I really think will elevate each other as the years go on. Then I look at McConkey and Palmer, and that's the wishful thinking side of things. There's a lot of ifs and buts and ands surrounding McConkey and Joshua Palmer that I just can't get past. I just can't see a clear path where McConkey and Joshua Palmer, even with this easy slate of games ahead of them, can really be focal points of this offense. I think it's going to be a running back focal offense. I think it's going to look very much like Jim Harbaugh in Michigan and how he utilized J.J. McCarthy and Blake Corum. I think that it's no knock against their abilities as wide receivers. It's just that they find themselves in a position where they're not necessarily the most coveted position in the Chargers offense. And then with the NFC South guys, it's not necessarily wishful thinking because we know these guys are excellent. But it's certainly looking like the balance of both of these guys lies with one over the other, because it's out of necessity that Chris Olave gets the most touches in that offense. And the Falcons' offense, at least on paper, is solid. And on the field, it'll probably be filled with question marks. And with question marks comes decisions about targets. And so I don't really know what Drake London is. But overall, this goes to show how volatile this wide receiver market is becoming. This goes to show how, as these teams get better, as they build on certain aspects that they want to, and how they focus on those aspects, how it becomes more difficult as someone who's playing fantasy football and looking for certain players to really find someone who you trust in a system that works for you. I preach balance. And out of all of these, I would say Moore and Chris Olave are going to be the guys who are balanced, because they're guys who can really step in for your wide receiver one should they underperform. And so, if you want balance like me, pick those two guys. But there are going to be moments where you're going to have to throw a dart at the dartboard and say, hey, I'm going to pick you up and see where the wind blows. Because the wide receiver market is not necessarily at its finest moment right now. But we're just about to do it for this segment. We are going to close the show with the biggest losers at the QB position. Guys who have definitely gone on the short end of the stick, but still talented guys nevertheless. We'll be right back after the break. Hello everyone and welcome back to the last segment of today's show on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Hope you guys have enjoyed the show this far. We are switching back to the QB, but this time to the losers in terms of the strength of schedule battle and debate at the QB position. Now, when I look at this list, there's a lot of talent on this list, but a lot of guys who are in pivotal years, whether it be in contract situations or in new homes, that really have to prove themselves, and the schedules aren't benefiting them. That being said, I don't see any reason as to why you should shy away from them in fantasy outside of the fact that their schedules might not favor them doing as well as we think. So without further ado, let's jump right into the biggest losers, the strength and schedule debate for the quarterbacks. Now, when I talk about QBs in certain situations, now is the time for a lot of these teams who are in playoff contention but really haven't gotten over the hump to reevaluate the quarterbacks that they picked up, say at the start of the decade, let's say in 2020, because now all these rookie deals are up, and these guys are signing big deals, and all of these deals are predicated on the future goings on of the franchise. So how we view them is going to come from their play, and I think that all of these guys kind of transcend schedule because all of them have different traits that really stand out and say, well, maybe we should reconsider what we think about strength of schedule and how important it is. Because if you're in a contract year and you want to prove that they made the right decision, that motivates you, regardless of who you play. And so all three of these guys are in situations where they're fighting to prove themselves. And that will stand for more in the future than any other aspects of what they do. So without further ado, let's jump right into them. Let's talk about Tua Tagovailoa for a little bit. Because Tua Tagovailoa is perhaps the most controversial quarterback in the league. Whether you think that Tyreek Hill really elevated his game and not the other way around, or if you think about him as someone who's failing to live up to certain moments, or if you really believe that he's the guy going forward for the Miami Dolphins, Tua Tagovailoa is definitely going to be a name that comes up a lot, not just in real life, but fantasy football. He's a big money man now. He got the big contract. The Dolphins truly believed in him, decided to sign him up for a couple more years. But the telling things about Tua Tagovailoa are, how comfortable is he when all of those things could be taken away from him? The big question mark going in for this offense, outside of anything related to injury histories of both Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, lie in the O-line. You lose guys like Robert Hunt, you potentially lose Connor Williams. And so I'm looking at the line in front of Tua, and that's a huge concern because Tua is someone who wants to pick and choose his spots. He's not necessarily someone predicated on running with the football. Another interesting stat that might be a quote-unquote nail in the coffin for some of you who are on the fence about Tua is that over the past 3 seasons, he's failed to average 22 or more fantasy points in any of them. And so that could lead to a little bit of concern for those who might have taken a flyer on Tua. To top it all off, the NFC West is the division he's playing this year. And that's always a tough division to play because each and every single one of those teams always are competitive. That being said, though, I'm not losing hope in Tua Tagovailoa. Obviously, if we go based on the future, perhaps in the future, Tua Tagovailoa is not going to be the quarterback we think he was. Perhaps when we look back on the 4-year span to come for Tua in, say, 2030, it might not be what people expect from him. But he still has the weapons to get things done. He still has enough talent in the tank to really be someone who you should look out for. And overall, the bottom line is, out of all these quarterbacks who are kind of in this middle tier, signing new deals, Tua certainly isn't the worst. He's not necessarily, Joe Burrow, who's already gotten to the Super Bowl and already beaten Patrick Mahomes, which is always the watermark for a quarterback in the AFC. But he certainly isn't the worst. And I feel like a lot of things centered around Tua have stemmed from just circumstances that really have not been his fault. The concussions, the cold weather, I don't necessarily blame those on Tua. So he definitely has traits there, talent there that will really help him as the years go on. It's just all about, doing it right. Compared to this next guy who I'm going to talk about, is definitely an interesting debate. Trevor Lawrence is definitely someone who I feel like when we look back on a lot more highly. A former number 1 overall pick who hasn't really lived up to those expectations as of yet. Also a big money man now. The Jaguars believed in him. So, in that debate, I feel like, as of right now, Tua has the most tools going forward to be the more successful QB. But Trevor Lawrence seems to have the better potential future. Because, as of this moment, Trevor Lawrence is being paid like a high-end quarterback, and he knows that he can be better. That should be incentive for him to get better. He has a much weaker wide receiver room than Tua, but I feel like he has more of a chance to elevate them than Tua does because Tua has a weapon who, let's be honest here, anyone can really throw to. I can't see the same for Trevor Lawrence. And the bottom line is, even with the second worst schedule in the league, Trevor Lawrence should have a bounce-back season. He should regress to the mean. He should find ways to really build upon what makes him a true kind of raw potential kind of player. And he actually has a lot of prove-it games this season. He plays Tua and the Dolphins. He plays the Browns, the Bills, and the Texans. Those are prove-it games. And so, both of those quarterbacks, if we had to pick between both of them, I would say Trevor Lawrence is the guy you go with. But who knows what the future holds? And who knows how long that the Tua, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle triumvirate is going to stay in Miami. So, when I look at these, let's forget the strength of schedule. When I look at these quarterbacks side by side, I have to answer the question of which one of them will succeed, more likely to succeed. It's going to be, I feel like, Tua. But when I think about guys who have longevity written all over them, then that's Trevor Lawrence. So I think the question for fantasy football managers, especially this season, is that which one of them is ready to take that leap? Which one of them do you feel more comfortable taking a flyer on? If all the quarterbacks with easy schedules or guys that you really like are gone, and you're staring at that duopoly of Tua and Trevor, which guy do you feel will take that leap? Because it's going to come to that, I think. It's going to come to trying to find a guy who fits what you want. And the last quarterback on this list is Russell Wilson. Let's talk about him a little bit. Let's talk about why he is not as coveted as other teams, why the Pittsburgh Steelers only signed him for 1 year. We're going to talk about him a lot in this show the next couple of weeks. And he's a guy who maybe past his prime, but when I think about him in relation to the Steelers, he's certainly someone who offers them a lot more than what you might realize. They've never really had a deep ball threat, Even Ben Roethlisberger wasn't that big of a deep ball threat. And Russell Wilson is that. Second hardest schedule, though. He plays in the AFC North. He plays the Ravens twice a year. He plays the Browns twice a year with that defense. And he plays the Bengals. So, let's start off with that factor. Is Russell Wilson a guy who can still compete? If so, just take the chance on him. But I think Justin Fields offers more. And so, that really hinders the development of the whole Russell Wilson storyline as a guy who I still think can compete. When I look at all three of these guys, the reason why I think that all of these guys are in weird circumstances is because Tua and Trevor are in the points of their career where they really need to step up, and Russell Wilson's in a point of his career where he's kind of over the hill a little bit. And so those three guys, without looking at strength of schedule, are in really weird places. And so it's up to you to determine which of these guys is going to take the next step and which of these guys still has in the tank to get going. But I should just want to do it for today's show. Thank you guys for tuning in. I've been Christopher Shepard. This has been the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Remember, like, follow, and subscribe to the show on the network. Consider leaving a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud. Thank you guys yet again. We'll be back tomorrow, better than ever, with another edition of the show.